Good afternoon, friends. David Wright here, and I am your host of the Disruptive Innovators Champions of Digital Business podcast. This afternoon, I am lucky enough to be joined by Francesco Lagutaine. Francesco, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
For our listeners who may not be familiar, can you just briefly tell everyone a little bit about your current role?
Certainly. I am now the head of the Chief Marketing and Communication Officer at M&T Bank, which is a bank in the Northeast. We occupy, we like to say, 25% of the GDP, 22% of the country up here in the Northeast, and a full service bank.
Everywhere, where I'm from knows M&T, that's for sure. So excited to get into some of the stuff that you're working on and, representing Buffalo, which I love as a Bills fan. But before that, we like to start the episode, Francesco, with just one piece of actionable advice you might look to leave the listeners with today.
I'll give you a piece of advice that was given to me very early in my career that sounds like counterintuitive, but in many ways was profound. Never be too good at your job. To me, that has always meant always keep on growing. When you get too good, you get complacent, you get comfortable. People get comfortable with you in a certain role. Always show your curiosity, desire to grow, push yourself in areas where you're learning, where you're always a little bit uncomfortable, and that will keep you progressing.
It's funny that you mentioned it. I was just on the phone with my mom an hour or so ago, and a lot of the listeners, though, she's the president and CEO of a nonprofit called the Center for Great Expectations out in New Jersey. But we were having this conversation and she actually referenced, the older I get, the less I know. And it's just in that humility of striving to always learn more, because truly, when you think about the universe and just everything, different cultures across the world, it's true. It's just, anyway, that's all just to say that I really appreciate that piece of advice to start the episode. Francesco, so let's first find out a little bit more about you. So, I know you've been at Manulife and Citi, but how did you start out and how did you get to the point in your career that you're at today?
So I started out as a law school degree, knowing that I didn't want to become a lawyer. And I went, and I always like to say my dad was an engineer, an artist. And I always loved that intersection of art and science and finding mathematical rhythms in art. And that's where I've sort of like really kind of majored my curiosity, which is the bringing creativity to business. I started out in advertising, which was a great place to kind of learn that. And back in the 90s, that was sort of like central to businesses. And the positioning was what really drove businesses. With the Web 2.0 and the beginning of 2001, the whole sort of like brand centricity shifted to experience. And businesses and brands were no longer built and defined on positioning. They were built and defined of consistency of an infinite series of interactions. And that's where I got really interested in moving to the client side. And I joined Citibank in New York. That was probably one of the big defining shifts in my career. The second one, I would say, when in 2009, the world stopped in financial world US, there was a great opportunity that opened up in Asia Pacific. And I moved to Singapore to be the chief marketing and service officer for Citi in Asia Pacific. And that was a fantastic growth spurt for me. Asia continues to be, but certainly at the time was incredibly dynamic, incredibly entrepreneurial. And Citi was a fantastic organization. And I really understood the power of creative thinking as a disruptor in how businesses is run. And I worked with an incredible group of business leaders that were welcoming of those approaches. And we did some amazing things. And now 3 years ago, I came back to the US. I work with just as a curious and imaginative leaders here at M&T, and we're trying to bring some of that thinking to a phenomenal regional bank here in the Northeast.
Super cool. We're actually looking to bring disruptive innovators to the Asia Pacific region. We started to get more into London this year, and then we have some conversations going with, a number of the countries out that way. I mean, like you said, things are just taking off. I mean, look at India, for example. Did your family go with you overseas?
Absolutely. We went there 3-year-old. We came back with 3 boys. So we're,
wow.
We spent 11 years there. It was a fantastic time, both for me professionally, but for the whole family, it was just an incredible experience.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's so important. I had someone on a while back, Nancy Post from John Deere. She talked about how when she traveled for work, when she'd come back with her kids, she'd always tell her children about the culture and about what she learned. And I just thought that was really cool. And to get to that lived experience, I think is invaluable. So yeah, very cool. What would you say, Francesco, is one of the most important things that you learned over the course of your journey? And I always like to ask, what was life like before learning it and after learning it?
I don't know that, or at least I can't necessarily think of a moment where there's like a pre and post necessarily. I think certainly my life has been a constant sort of iterative learning process. And there are moments where, back to never be too comfortable, right? There are moments where it's a very rapid iteration of growth, and there are moments where things slow down. But I would say curiosity has always been a big driver, and that progressively becoming more and more comfortable with being uncomfortable, and more comfortable with sort of like questioning, and more comfortable with not being sure, because that's kind of hard when you start out, right? You get the sense of like, you crave to be an authority. And I found out that actually the people who knew more were actually the people who asked the better questions. No, not because they knew the answers, but they knew better questions to ask. That's certainly something that I've always strived to do, is like constantly refine my curiosity, because the speed of your growth depends on the quality of the questions you can ask.
It reminds me, I used to, on a number of the earlier episodes of Disruptive Innovators, we talked a decent amount about imposter syndrome. And as an entrepreneur starting out, I was so susceptible to that. And there's just a lot of fear of failure, uncertainty. And like you're saying, I just had to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it was hard, but it became a practice, and it involved, the lived experiences and mindfulness, realizing that acting right away is not always the right solution. I love your remarks about, being inquisitive and curious too, because I feel like everything that I've done with Disruptive Innovators, with Disruptive Innovations, is a product of me asking people that know more than me about best practices, about frameworks, and just kind of collecting that all together and then offering that to people, and continually doing that. I'd ask you too, you mentioned, the growth throughout the course of your life, sometimes it being, what I heard was like more exponential, sometimes kind of being more just consistent. Is there a time that you were challenged, or a moment that was actually particularly difficult to get through, but leading out of that, you experienced some of that exponential growth?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about imposter syndrome. When I moved to Asia, I was probably 3 or 4 years into my client job. I had left sort of like the advertising career behind. My first years in New York, I was still in charge of advertising, and I moved to Asia, completely new place, where I was the head of marketing and sales and customer service, working with an incredibly talented group of business leaders. And all of a sudden, I was supposed to carry my own in business reviews and investment in a bank, right? And so I remember for a good 3 months, if not more, I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, tomorrow's the day they'll find out I'm out of my depth. And I remember actually I was hired by an individual that then moved on almost instantly when I got there. And I ended up working for these CEO who was terrified of from when I knew him, because he was an incredibly sharp guy, but he ended up becoming a really good friend and the best boss I've ever worked for. And he assembled this great group of people. And I went to the first meeting that he called up. And I remember flying back and calling my wife as soon as I landed. And I said, it's like I'm going to Pamplona. It's like I'm going to run with the bulls. And it's like, there's a good chance if I keep up, I'll have the best time of my career, but there's a good chance that I'm going to get trampled. And that notion, what sort of drives me is like, I don't know where this is going to go, but if I was to be successful, what's the next thing I should do? And that's what kind of kept me going. But it sort of like opened up this incredible world where I was, I came from a creative industry that was about telling stories. And I brought it into creating experiences, creating business opportunities, building value propositions. We started thinking about journeys before journeys wasn't even a word, on how we were rethinking the role of branches in the cities in Asia. And it kind of like opened up a whole new world and a whole new confidence for me as well. But I'm not lying. The first 6 months, I was glad it was tough. It was tough.
But it just goes to show you. I mean, I appreciate that vulnerability so much because I feel like most any executive or any business leader that's really striving for that level of growth is going to be flying over their skis at some point, whether they admit it or not. Sometimes they'll be leveraging their ego to, hide those feelings of insecurity, but it's there if they're really reaching. So yeah, I appreciate that so much. And I'm a Citi client myself. I appreciate their revamping the business portal, but I love their experience. It's been something that I've enjoyed for many years now.
We'll have to get you as a kind of M&T now, so you can compare the two.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And honestly, now that I know everything you guys are doing with the Bills, I kind of want to do it. I'm going to be up in Buffalo to see a game later this year too. So I'll come on by. So Francesco, let's get into M&T. Before we do, I always just like to ask, favorite book that you've read recently, or literary piece, podcast, or you could go all time, any piece that you're particularly keen on either lately or just in general?
I'll give you in general. Lately, I read a lot of nonfiction, especially history. And so I like the recent history, like books about, I love this retrospective on like the great financial crisis, or, and these things, or I read a lot of history, I like sort of 19th century history. But I would say one of the books that had the most profound impressions on me as I was sort of growing up, I was a very young adult, is Immortality by Milan Kundera, or Kundera, or however. And he actually just recently died, but he was a very popular author, Czech Republic in the 90s. And it was, they're kind of like sort of philosophical novels. But what I really liked about that was the author, he's got sort of like this observation. So he observes and interprets actions and gestures and behaviors that are intuitive and second nature on a daily basis, and sort of helps people understand the impacts of things that we do as just because they're instincts, but that reveal still a motivation that's within you. And when you think about marketing and you think about driving a business, I think the edge is when you understand the subliminal motivation behind human actions. That's where you can actually then position your product, position your offer, your campaign, and that's what gives you the edge. And part of that mindset of like trying to understand the reason for certain gestures, fascination started there.
I mean, that's super cool. And I think, you nailed it in starting there and going into those like subliminal actions is taking it even a step further. I have to check it out. I've never read the book. The Four Agreements, I read that at that like kind of young adult phase, and that had a big impact on me. And also learning about, this is kind of tangential, like the way that I became very conscious of the way that I treat people that I may have otherwise been indifferent to. So when I'm going about my day, how am I interacting with the barista, person that I pass in the elevator, I guess that's not necessarily relevant to customer experience, but just that being conscious of that was, really important in my life. Anyway, I digress. So Francesco, let's talk about M&T Bank. So, you're the Chief Marketing, Communications, and Digital Officer for M&T Bank. Talk to me a little bit about your vision for the organization as it's derived from the overall, mission of M&T Bank.
So we have a great mission, and I've actually sort of discovered coming to M&T Bank, it's sort of like dimension of banking that for a marketer is an incredibly fertile place to be. We talk of ourselves as we're a community bank at scale. And that comes from our soul as a community bank. We profoundly believe that the country, America, needs community banks, and they're financial institutions that are fundamentally committed to the welfare of the communities they do business in. National banks are mostly committed to shareholders. And so you will see their business migrates as opportunities to do business migrate. So you'll see often they close businesses, they close branches in certain parts of the country and open in others because that's where the wealth is going. Banks are banks that are committed to their community, and they become, because of that, they are particularly important to those communities. And so we put the well-being of our communities at the center of everything that we do. At the same time, the way the financial world and banks is evolving, we see that, customers expect certain the convenience and products and digital capabilities. They expect the safety that comes with significant technological capabilities, some of the sophistication, and those are all product of scale. And so there's that area where you like the empathy and the connection and the commitment of a community bank, but a community bank struggles to give you the benefits of scale, and vice versa. A bank that gives you the benefits of scale struggles to give you that empathy. And we like to sort of like play in that space. We're not the only one doing it. As many of the super regional probably want to play in that space. I believe that we're one of the best at doing it. It comes to degrees of execution, and it's sort of like, it's two things. One is that commitment that you have to be a community bank, and always thinking about scale in service of the community first. So what are the benefits to the customer, the community, that we can use scale for, as opposed to necessarily a community of the bank? And I'll give you a reason why I think we do it really well. We like to talk about this notion of we live here. One of the things that M&T has done really well is it has senior management is decentralized. We have very high level of senior leaders in any of the 28 communities that we do business in. And that creates personal commitments to those communities. It's easy for banks to say, well, I'm a community bank. But for me, in Buffalo, the schools in Buffalo are the schools that my kids go to. The food in Buffalo is the food that my family eats. The streets are the streets that we walk. And whether they're safe or not, it's personal to me. And that what makes, I believe, us sort of genuine when we say we really care about the communities we operate in.
It's really cool to see that community bank at scale. And I mean, I do feel that based on what I've seen from M&T Bank. What are some of the key initiatives you're focused on right now, Francesco, from a technology and operations standpoint? What you can share of that?
It's kind of tricky to go because, level of altitude. I think, it's really interesting. The part that what we're focused on is in hitting the perfect balance in our technology delivery to our customers. And by that, I mean, we operate mostly in second, third tier cities in the Northeast. We have an incredible humanity advantage. If you go into any of our branches, the engagement in the branches, the attitude that our branch staff has, people work for M&T forever. And that commitment is something that is unique and every client feels. So when we build digital capabilities, that is the sweet spot for us is we want to deliver everything the customer reasonably expects and wants to do digitally and really simply. But we're also very happy for them to go into a branch. And one of the things here is like, we like to talk about this as a higher degree of personalization. A lot of people talk about data as a way to know your customers. Obviously, we employ data. Banking is a very data-rich industry. We love to employ data for personalization and knowing our customers. But we believe that there's a higher degree of knowledge, which is it's not just we know them, but what's beautiful for us is customers know us. And by that, I mean, walk into a branch and they recognize. I mean, I'm always amazed when I visit branches to see customers come in and they greet tellers like their friends. And that to me is that two-way personalization and two-way recognition that is very unique.
Yeah, that is unique. And it's funny. I've obviously seen that before in pockets or in certain instances, but I've never thought about it from a customer experience, journey planning standpoint, that two-way, recognition, if you will. I mean, that's special.
Think about it as a restaurant, right? If you walk into a restaurant, Web 2.0, you walk into a restaurant and you are served exactly what you feel what you want to eat that day, even before you thought about it. Pretty awesome, right? It's like every meal is pretty good. But aren't you going to miss that sort of like familiar face of the owner of the restaurant that you've known for a long time? And when you come in and say, hey, Mario, what's happening? What do you have today? And then it gets what you really want that day. It's served with that humanity and that personality that gives you the sense that you've come home, as opposed to you come to a place that can simply guess what you want.
That's profound. And I mean, it's true. I mean, and oftentimes I will go to the place, I'll gravitate towards those places, the places where people know me. Maybe I'll get a free appetizer, or it's just a pleasant experience. And so that makes a lot of sense. I haven't employed it in as much from a business standpoint. So it's just good to think about. How about any challenges that are facing M&T as a business today?
Well, there's the challenges. There's always a number of challenges. There's environmental challenges, and by that, there's challenges that the industry has. But from our perspective, also the challenges that we have to help our customers with. Right? We've gone through COVID. Coming out of COVID, we've gone through an unprecedented for many customers period of high interest rates. The high interest rates were normal for many of us that have a few more springs behind us. But there's a huge generation of customers that have never, certainly in their adult lifetime, experience high interest rates. And so how do you help customers transition and understand how your financial behavior needs to change as some of these fundamental macroeconomic conditions change? That's from a marketing perspective and an innovation perspective, that's what's most interesting to me.
That makes a lot of sense. How about any particularly innovative technologies that are on the roadmap that you're excited about? Anything that comes to mind there?
We like to major on the problem that we're trying to solve and technology that we're looking to adopt. And I'll give you a quick answer before coming with something a little more exciting. But the most disruptive in terms of customer benefit technology that we quickly adopted during COVID, two, electronic signature and the ability to make an appointment over the website. And those were very, very simple, but our ability to understand those were the two most immediate needs that our customers had did two things. One is our ability to make sure the customer could lose a step in their financial needs by doing business remotely. The other thing that we learned from appointment setting was useful, but also more profound for later, which is whenever we use that as a way to get together with our customers arrived better prepared to the meeting. The banker was better prepared for the meeting. There's a whole exchange that can go on. Often the customers come in and they say, do you have your social security card for certain things that are still requirements? And the customer has to go home, right? Now we can actually tell them. And that's part of, those are kind of like the way we like, you see, the issue was, how can I make my meeting most effective? And sometimes it's not the most cutting edge technology that gives you that advantage. Aside from that, we are constantly experimenting. So one of the things that we're sort of kind of probably most engaged in experimenting right now is AI. And we're trying to look at AI from an analytics perspective in terms of like helping us in real time predict customer issues and help customer service through that, all the way from kind of like the simpler end of how do we automate some of the marketing tasks, allowing us to put human creativity where it's best used.
Very cool. But I agree with you in that I was just talking to a peer about this earlier today. So I'm speaking on a panel in a few months about how as a technology advisor, you can't just be an order taker sourcing technology, right? Because if you want to be a trusted advisor, because more often than not nowadays, the issue that you're trying to solve for, technology doesn't directly solve it. There's operational considerations that need to be made or workflow changes. Like before we're just migrating from one technology to another, like throw it up on the board. And I read a book and I've cited it a few times, the Phoenix Project. It's about DevOps, right? So it's when you think of the customer journey from the first interaction, the first time a customer ever touches your organization throughout the continuum, and then ad infinitum as you look to follow up and kind of get them in the organization, where are those bottlenecks? Like, where do I have to look out for ways to improve that experience all the way through? And when I think about things that way, it helps point out, and then I look at how technology can better serve that journey and solve for those or help solve for those issues.
And how quickly and simply you solve those problems augments your ability to solve more and more problems. My favorite innovation story is writing in space. I'm sure you've heard it before, but the Americans built this incredibly sophisticated ink pen that all ink pens work with gravity, so they couldn't write in space. The Russians gave their astronauts pencils, and so all the ingenuity that was creating a pen that can write with the absence of gravity could have been deployed to the next problem that the astronauts would have encountered.
100%. I love it. So Francesco, a couple last questions for you. One would be, and we've kind of touched on it in a few different ways, but I like to ask, where do you see the banking and financial services industry going in the future? Or what do you think will be some of the biggest changes as time passes?
That's quite a profound question that I think the industry has faced for a long time. And, I actually think that the most banking, sometimes we get excited about the art of the possible. We get a lot of innovation in the margin, which is interesting. And in some cases is what allows you to attract your customer. But I think that the biggest challenge and the financial industry and customers that need financial products will face in the future, and the banks will face it safely. With so much of our financial lives, our identity being digital, the safety of our customers is going to be the most important thing. And actually for financial institutions, trust, because, even the financial decisions that you take today, you want really, there's so many variables that go into deciding whether you've done the right thing. And, everything can be tweaked and adjusted. The currency is trust, and you have to trust the financial institution keeps you safe, knows you, and has your best interest in mind, and therefore will do the right thing by you as you go along. And to me, that's where the majority of our ingenuity should go.
A profound answer to a profound question, for sure. I appreciate that, Francesco. So last question would just be, if you could go back 5 or 10 years in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say, not that I haven't done it, but I realized that I've done it more and more, is be yourself and trust your instincts and have fun in the process. And that to me is very important, because when you're yourself and you are having fun, you deliver the best that you have. Right. And I've always been a lot better at being me than being someone else. You know what I mean? And so find what gives you purpose, because you're going to be amazing at doing it. And sometimes I tried to be someone that I thought I wanted to be, and I've never been good at doing that. It's only when I did things that gave me joy, that stimulated my curiosity. That's how I like to manage people. It's like manage for strengths, even to yourself. It's like, be aware of your weaknesses always, but always double down on your strength, because that's what's going to make you grow. Getting a little better at your weakness is never going to make you great. What's going to make you great is really measuring on your strengths.
100%. I mean, just great way to end things. Francesco, it was an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Likewise, it was great. Thank you for inviting me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you all next week.